Welcome, dear viewers. Thank you so much for all the love you've shown to the channel over the past week. Starting this week, there will be exclusive scary episodes for our channel members. Join our membership at just 99 cents per month. Enjoy. I never wanted to follow in my uncle's footsteps. He'd worked as a maintenance supervisor at the Kola Super Deep Borehole facility in Murmansk Oblast for 20 years before his death. A heart attack, they said. Natural causes. But the nightmares I'd had since identified his body told a different story. 3 months ago, I found myself driving through the desolate Russian Arctic, desperately low on cash and options. My academic career had imploded after allegations of plagiarism, false accusations from a jealous colleague, but the damage was done. When an old family connection offered me a job at the same research facility where Uncle Nikolai had worked, I reluctantly accepted. The facility had changed since I'd visited as a kid. The main drilling operations had been officially abandoned in the late 90s, but a smaller complex remained operational, tucked away behind the decaying infrastructure of the world's deepest borehole. Now it housed what they called specialized geological research. At least that's what my employment contract stated. My first few weeks were uneventful. Basic maintenance work, fixing pipes, checking pressure gauges, keeping the ancient heating system operational. The pay was decent, and the isolation gave me time to think. The night shift was lonely but peaceful. Until last Tuesday. I was replacing fluorescent tubes in the lower east corridor when I heard it, a soft tapping coming from inside the wall. At first, I thought it was just the pipes contracting in the cold, but the rhythm was too deliberate. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 slow ones, pause, then 3 quick again, over and over. I pressed my ear against the cold concrete and the tapping stopped immediately, as if whatever was making the noise knew I was listening. Fucking pipes, I muttered, trying to convince myself. But as I walked away, the tapping resumed. Later that night, I mentioned it to Pavle, the grizzled security guard who'd worked at the facility since the Soviet days. "There are things in this place you don't want to know about, Alexei," he said, his roomy eyes avoiding mine. "Things your uncle discovered. Why do you think he had the heart attack?" "What things?" I pressed. Pavle took a long drag from his cigarette. "There's a reason they keep this place running. It's not research." He flicked his ash and leaned closer. "Have you been to Sublevel D yet?" I shook my head. "Good. Keep it that way. And if Kuznetsov gives you a list of rules, you follow them, to the letter. Your uncle didn't." The next day, I found an envelope in my locker. Inside was a typed list of 7 rules and a key card I didn't recognize. The heading read, "Maintenance Protocols for Sublevel D, Strict Adherence Required." I almost threw it away, thinking it was some kind of prank the other workers were playing on the new guy. But then I remembered the tapping in the walls and Pavle's warning. I read the first rule. 1: Never enter Sublevel D between 1:27 a.m. and 4:03 a.m., regardless of emergency alerts. Little did I know that reading those rules would be the beginning of the end, that I'd become entangled in something that began long before I was born, in 1983 to be exact, when the Soviet Union was desperate to win the Cold War by any means necessary, even if it meant breaking the fundamental laws of nature itself. I stared at the rule sheet for a long time, reading each instruction carefully. Number 1. Never enter Sublevel D between 1:27 a.m. and 4:03 a.m., regardless of emergency alerts. Number 2. When checking pressure gauges in room D7, always whistle continuously. Stop whistling only after you've exited and locked the door. 3. The red telephone in the monitoring station will ring occasionally. Answer before the 4th ring. Say only, "Maintenance, stand by." Hang up after exactly 7 seconds, regardless of what you hear on the line. 4. If temperature in any chamber drops below -40 degrees Celsius, do not attempt to adjust the thermostat. Leave immediately and report to Supervisor Kuznetsov using the phrase, "Calibration required in Sector 6. 5. The supply closet in Corridor D9 contains a mirror. If your reflection blinks before you do, exit Sublevel D immediately and do not return for 24 hours. 6. Some doors in Sublevel D appear to lead to maintenance tunnels not on the official blueprints. Do not enter these passages under any circumstances. 7. If you hear your name called from behind the sealed door at the end of corridor D12, ignore it completely, even if the voice belongs to someone you know. What kind of maintenance job required rules like these? My palms were sweaty despite the perpetual chill of the facility. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket along with the key card. During lunch, I tried asking Anton, a technician who'd been around almost as long as Pavle, about Sublevel D. Not my department, he mumbled through a mouthful of borscht, suddenly very interested in his soup. You've got clearance now? Kuznetsov must like you. I don't even know who Kuznetsov is, I said. I found the access card in my locker. Anton's spoon clattered against his bowl. You didn't request access? No, should I have? He wiped his mouth and stood up. I have to get back to work. Wait, is this about what happened in 83? Pavle mentioned something. Anton's face drained of color. Don't mention dates, especially that one. He leaned in, voice barely audible. Your uncle asked too many questions too. Look what happened to him. He left me sitting alone in the cafeteria, more confused than ever. That night, curiosity got the better of me. At midnight, with the facility operating on minimal staff, I made my way to the service elevator that supposedly led to the sublevels. My keycard worked, revealing a button panel with letters A through F. I pressed D. The elevator descended for what felt like minutes, much deeper than I'd expected. When the doors finally opened, I was hit by a blast of frigid air that smelled faintly metallic, like old blood. Sublevel D was nothing like the upper facility. The corridors were wider, the ceiling higher, and everything was painted an institutional green that had faded to a sickly pallor under the harsh fluorescent lights. Pipes ran along the walls, occasionally disappearing into the concrete. Some were labelled in faded Cyrillic lettering I couldn't quite make out. I checked my watch. 12:17 a.m. Plenty of time before the 1:27 curfew mentioned in the first rule. The corridor stretched ahead, doors on either side labelled with alphanumeric codes. D1, D2, and so on. Following the rules sheet, I should find D7 for the pressure gauges and be sure to whistle while inside. I passed D6 and slowed down. The temperature seemed to be dropping with each step. I zipped my maintenance jumpsuit up to my throat, wishing I'd brought gloves. Room D7's door was made of heavy steel with a small reinforced window. Through it, I could see what looked like old-fashioned pressure gauges and monitoring equipment. I swiped my card and the lock disengaged with a heavy clunk. Remembering Rule 2, I started whistling Katyusha as I entered the room. The space was dominated by a wall of analog gauges, dials, and switches that looked like they hadn't been updated since the Soviet era. In the center stood a large cylindrical chamber with a small viewing window connected to the gauges by a network of pipes. Still whistling, I approached the chamber. The window was frosted over from the inside, but as I got closer, I could make out a vague shape behind the glass. Something large and horizontal. Something person-shaped. My whistling faltered for a second before I forced myself to continue. I stepped back, maintaining my tune, and checked the pressure gauges as quickly as possible. All normal from what I could tell. Whatever this equipment was monitoring, it was functioning as intended. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A clipboard hanging by the door with a maintenance log. The last entry was dated 3 days ago. Subject 4, vital signs stable. No degradation in neural activity. Subject 4. A soft tapping sound started from inside the cylindrical chamber. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 slow ones, pause, then 3 quick again. The same pattern I'd heard in the walls. I backed out of the room, still whistling despite my racing heart, and didn't stop until the door was firmly closed behind me. Whatever was in that chamber, it wasn't just machinery. It was alive, and somehow, it was the source of the tapping I'd heard all the way up in the main facility. I checked my watch again. 12:48 a.m. I had more time before the first rule's deadline, but suddenly, I didn't want to be here anymore. Not without answers. I needed to find Kuznetsov. Finding Kuznetsov proved easier than expected. The next morning, I was called to the administration wing, a rarely visited section of the main facility where bureaucrats processed paperwork and ignored maintenance requests. The secretary, a stern-faced older woman named Irina, led me down a corridor to an office with a nameplate reading, V. Kuznetsov, Special Projects Oversight. "He's expecting you," she said, before walking away with a click-clack of sensible heels on linoleum. Kuznetsov wasn't what I'd imagined. I'd pictured some grey-haired Soviet relic, but the man behind the desk looked to be in his mid-40s, with a closely cropped beard and sharp, intelligent eyes. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that seemed absurdly formal for this remote outpost. "Alexei Borodin," he said, not bothering to stand. "Nikolai's nephew. You look like him. You knew my uncle. I know everyone who works in this facility, past and present." His Russian had the precise clip of Moscow, not the rougher northern accent common in Murmansk. "I understand you've accessed Sublevel D." I tensed. "The keycard was in my locker. You assumed correctly. I put it there." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit." I obeyed, noticing framed certificates on the wall behind him. Molecular biology, cryogenics, neural science. Nothing related to geology or drilling operations. "You've read the rules?" he asked. "Yes." "And did you follow them during your visit last night?" I swallowed. "Yes, I whistled in room D7 as instructed." A faint smile touched his lips. "Good. That one is particularly important." He opened a drawer and removed a file folder thick with papers. "Tell me what you saw in the chamber." I couldn't see much. The window was frosted over. "But you saw something." It wasn't a question. I shifted uncomfortably. "A shape. Like a person." Kuznetsov nodded slowly. "Your uncle was a good man, dedicated but too curious for his own good." He tapped the folder. "These are your uncle's notes, his unauthorized investigation." My heart pounded. Into what? The Rusalka project. He pronounced it with such gravity that I knew immediately this wasn't standard research. A Soviet initiative from 1983. Do you know much about the Cold War, Alexei? Enough, we were losing. America's Star Wars program was bankrupting us. Precisely. The Americans were winning the arms race, so we looked for alternative advantages. He slid the folder across the desk. "Your clearance now includes access to this information. Study it, understand it, but do not discuss it with anyone but me." I took the folder, surprised he'd share this so freely. Why me? Because Nikolai's research needs to be completed, and because the facility requires someone with your specific technical expertise. He glanced at his watch. "You're on night shift again tonight. Review these materials before your shift. After you've read them, we'll talk again." As I stood to leave, Kuznetsov added, "One more thing. The rules aren't suggestions, Alexei. They're survival protocols. Break them and you'll end up like the maintenance worker we lost in '97. What happened to him?" He stopped whistling in room D7. Kuznetsov's face was impassive. "We found him the next morning. His body was room temperature, but his brain tissue was frozen solid, from the inside out." I clutched the folder tighter. "How is that possible?" "Read the file, then you'll understand why we whistle." Back in my cramped dormitory room, I spread my uncle's notes across the bed. Most were handwritten observations, diagrams, and copies of official documents that I suspected he shouldn't have had access to. One yellowed report caught my eye immediately, an overview of Project Rusalka, dated February 1983. Project objective: development of human stasis technology for extended deep space missions. Preliminary animal trials show promise. Neural freezing methodology prevents cellular degeneration while maintaining minimal consciousness, essential for preventing brain death during prolonged suspension. First human trials approved for voluntary military subjects. Attached was a faded photograph of 7 men in Soviet military uniforms standing outside what looked like the entrance to the Kola facility. They were labeled as the first volunteers, 7 men who thought they were serving their country by testing technology for space exploration. As I dug deeper, the details became more disturbing. The scientists had developed a method to keep the human brain in a state of near-suspended animation, slowing metabolic processes to almost nothing while maintaining a minimal level of consciousness to prevent brain death during prolonged freezing. But something had gone wrong. My uncle's notes became increasingly frantic as they progressed. The subjects remain conscious at a level not anticipated by the original researchers. They cannot move or speak, but brain activity suggests they are aware. 40 years of awareness while frozen, the implications are horrifying. Subject 4 has developed some method of communication, tapping pattern detected through monitoring equipment, attempting to establish response protocol. Whistling seems to disrupt the telepathic connection. Simple folk wisdom about whistling warding off rusalki, water spirits, may have scientific basis. Ultrasonic frequencies? Need to investigate further. Cannot shut down the stasis chambers. Attempted power cut resulted in immediate temperature fluctuation. Subjects reacted violently. Psychokinetic event. 3 researchers hospitalized. Project director Sokolov committed suicide the following day. The last page was a hastily scrawled note dated just 3 days before my uncle's heart attack. They're trying to get out. God help us if they do. The rules are the only thing keeping them contained. Kuznetsov knows more than he's saying. The original experiment wasn't just about space travel. Ask about the seismic anomalies of 83. I sat back, my head spinning. The 7 men in that photograph had been frozen for over 40 years. Their brains still conscious, aware of every second. And somehow, at least one of them, Subject 4, had developed abilities no human should possess. A notification pinged on my phone. A text message from an unknown number. The red telephone will ring tonight. Remember Rule 3. K. I checked my watch. My shift started in an hour. I tucked my uncle's notes under my mattress and tried to process what I'd learned. 7 volunteers, frozen but conscious for decades, developing supernatural abilities from their prolonged isolation. And tonight, one of them would try to contact me. What the hell had I gotten myself into? My shift started like any other, checking in with the night supervisor, grabbing my tools, reviewing the maintenance log for issues needing attention. But everything felt different now. The facility's endless corridors seemed more ominous, the constant mechanical hum more sinister. I wasn't just maintaining equipment, I was keeping ancient horrors contained. At 11:30 p.m, I made my decision. I had to go back to Sublevel D to see more of what my uncle had discovered. This time I'd be prepared. I brought a digital thermometer, a small notebook, and a heavy flashlight that could double as a weapon if needed. I'd memorized the rules and my uncle's notes. Whatever happened, I wouldn't end up like the maintenance worker from 97. The elevator descent felt even longer this time, each floor passing with a soft pneumatic hiss. When the doors opened to Sublevel D, I stepped out cautiously, senses heightened. The monitoring station was my first destination. According to the facility layout in my uncle's notes, it served as the central hub for observing all 7 stasis chambers, and it contained the red telephone mentioned in Rule 3. I found it at the end of a short corridor, a circular room with monitoring equipment arranged around a central workstation. Screens displayed vital signs, temperature readings, and what looked like EEG patterns from multiple subjects. 7 distinct patterns, each labeled with a number. The red telephone sat on a desk in the corner. An actual rotary phone, painted a bright Soviet red, looking like a relic from the 1980s. I checked my watch, 11:47 p.m. I had over an hour before the 1:27 a.m. curfew from Rule 1. Approaching the monitors, I studied the data streams. The vital signs were minimal, heartbeats so slow they barely registered, respiration almost non-existent. But the brain activity was a different story. All 7 EEG readings showed complex patterns, some spiking periodically in what looked like REM sleep. Except these men weren't sleeping. According to my uncle's notes, they were fully aware, trapped in frozen bodies for 4 decades. A photograph was taped to one of the monitors, the same group shot I'd seen in the file, but with better quality. 7 young soldiers in their 20s smiling confidently. Their names were written beneath. Number 1, Dmitry Baranov. Number 2, Mikhail Yudin. Number 3, Viktor Leonov. Number 4, Fyodor Nestorov. Number 5, Oleg Vasilyev. Bistya 6, Leonid Kuznetsov. 7, Grigory Sokolov. I froze, staring at the 6th name, Leonid Kuznetsov. Could it be? Was the Kuznetsov who'd given me access, the man in charge of the entire operation, related to one of the original volunteers? A son, perhaps, carrying on his father's legacy. That would explain his investment in the project, his access to information. I moved to the next room, labelled Archive, hoping to find personnel records that might confirm my suspicion. The archive was a small room lined with filing cabinets, the air thick with the smell of old paper. I found the personnel section and began searching for Kuznetsov's file. Instead, I found something far more disturbing. A red folder labelled Seismic Event, October 1983, contained reports of an unprecedented earthquake that had occurred during the initial freezing process. The epicenter was pinpointed directly beneath the Kola facility at a depth deeper than the borehole had officially reached. The attached analysis suggested it wasn't a natural earthquake at all, but something else, a resonance event triggered by the neural freezing process. One researcher had theorized that the collective shock of 7 minds simultaneously entering the frozen state had somehow generated enough psychic energy to affect the physical world. It was labeled Hypothesis Tachys-Psychic Eruption. The file noted that similar smaller events had occurred whenever the subjects experienced collective distress. A cold numbness spread through my body as I realized what this meant. These men weren't just victims of a Cold War experiment. They were potentially dangerous, capable of affecting the physical world despite their frozen state. I was so engrossed in the file that I almost missed the sound, the shrill mechanical ring of the red telephone. I sprinted back to the monitoring station. The old rotary phone rang a second time as I entered the room. Rule 3, answer before the 4th ring. Say only, maintenance, stand by. Hang up after exactly 7 seconds. It rang a 3rd time as I reached for it, my hand trembling slightly. I picked up the receiver. Maintenance, stand by. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Silence on the line, then a sound like rushing water, distant and hollow. I counted in my head. 1, 2, 3. Alexei. A voice, distorted and unnatural, stretched my name into an impossible length. Help us! 5, 6. Your uncle understood. We showed him the truth. 7. I slammed the phone down, my heart pounding. They knew my name. They knew about my uncle. And now they knew I was here. The temperature in the room suddenly plummeted. My breath fogged in front of me as ice crystals began forming on the monitors. The EEG readings for all 7 subjects spiked simultaneously, their patterns synchronizing in perfect, impossible harmony. I checked my watch, 12:17 a.m., still well before the 1:27 curfew. But something was happening, something that hadn't been covered in the rules. The lights flickered, and I heard it again, tapping from inside the walls. But not just from one place, from everywhere, all around me, a cacophony of taps creating a rhythm that seemed to vibrate through my bones. I needed to see them, to understand what I was dealing with. According to the facility map, the Stasis Chambers were located in a circular arrangement around a central hub, like spokes on a wheel. Room D14, not mentioned in the rules, was labelled as Observation. I made my way there, following the signs through increasingly cold corridors. The tapping followed me, growing more insistent with each step. Room D14 had a heavy security door with a small window. Through it, I could see a raised platform surrounded by 7 glass cylinders, each containing what looked like a metal sarcophagus connected to a network of pipes and monitoring equipment. I swiped my keycard. The door unlocked with a heavy clunk. The cold hit me like a physical blow as I entered. It must have been at least minus 30 degrees Celsius, and dropping rapidly. I zipped my maintenance jumpsuit to the collar and pulled up the hood, knowing it wouldn't be enough if I stayed long. The central platform gave a clear view of all 7 chambers. Each cylindrical tank was frosted over, making it impossible to see inside clearly, but they all had small viewing windows like the one I'd seen in room D7. I approached the nearest chamber, labelled Subject 1, Baranov. Wiping away the frost, I peered inside. The face that stared back was not the young soldier from the photograph. It was a nightmare. Skin pulled tight over a skull, lips blue and cracked, eyes sunken into deep hollows. But those eyes, they were alert, aware, and looking directly at me. I stumbled backward, nearly falling off the platform. All around the room, frost was melting from the viewing windows of each chamber as if by some invisible force. 7 pairs of eyes stared out at me, ancient, aware, and filled with a hunger that transcended physical need. The tapping had stopped. In its place came a collective whisper that seemed to bypass my ears and speak directly into my mind. Free us. The lights went out, plunging the room into darkness except for the faint emergency lights around the perimeter. In that dim red glow, I saw something impossible. Condensation on the inside of the glass forming words. We know what happened to Nikolai. My uncle. They were offering information about my uncle. What happened to him? I asked, my voice shaking. Did you kill him? The condensation shifted, forming new words. Kuznetsov killed him. Why? He discovered the truth. What truth? The temperature dropped further. My fingers were going numb, and my breath came in painful gasps as the frigid air burned my lungs. Not what you think. What does that mean? What aren't you telling me? 1983 was not the beginning. A loud alarm suddenly blared throughout the facility. Red warning lights began flashing as a computerized voice announced, "Temperature critical in observation. Emergency protocols initiated. All personnel evacuate sublevel D immediately." I checked my watch. 1:26 a.m. 1 minute until the first rule's curfew began. The door I'd entered through suddenly slammed shut with a hydraulic hiss. The locking mechanism engaged with a heavy thunk. I was trapped in a rapidly freezing room with 7 psychically powerful frozen cosmonauts. 1 minute before the time when the rules explicitly stated I shouldn't be here. And somewhere above me, Kuznetsov knew exactly where I was. 1:27 a.m. The first rule was now in effect. My fingers fumbled for the keycard, too numb to grip it properly. I dropped it on the floor, cursing as I bent to retrieve it. When I swiped it at the door panel, the light remained red. Override engaged, no exit during restricted hours. Fuck! I pounded on the door, but the thick metal wouldn't budge. The temperature continued to plummet. According to my digital thermometer, it was now -42 degrees Celsius. Rule 4 stated that if any chamber dropped below -40 degrees Celsius, I should leave immediately and report to Kuznetsov. But I couldn't leave, and Kuznetsov likely already knew about the temperature crisis. A sharp crack echoed through the room. I spun around to see a spiderweb of fractures forming on the glass cylinder of Subject 3's chamber. The freezing cold was contracting the glass. At this rate, the structural integrity of all the chambers would be compromised. Another crack, this time from Subject 6's chamber, Leonid Kuznetsov's chamber. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the frigid air. The condensation messages had vanished, replaced by a new phenomenon. The frost on each chamber was receding, clearing a perfect circle on each viewing window. 7 pairs of ancient eyes stared at me with predatory focus. The eyes of Subject 6, Kuznetsov, seemed to bore into me with particular intensity. Something about them nagged at my memory, a familiarity I couldn't place. The collective whisper returned, clearer this time. 3 minutes. 3 minutes until what? I demanded. Until we can touch your mind directly. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Whatever abilities these men had developed during their decades of frozen consciousness, they were strongest during the hours specified in Rule 1, between 1:27 a.m. and 4:03 a.m. That's why no one was supposed to be here during those hours. It wasn't just for safety, it was to prevent contact. I had to find a way out, rules be damned. There had to be an emergency exit, a maintenance tunnel, something. Wait. Rule 6. Some doors in Sublevel D appear to lead to maintenance tunnels not on the official blueprints. Do not enter these passages under any circumstances. I scanned the room frantically. In the dim emergency lighting, I spotted it, a narrow door almost hidden behind one of the stasis chambers, with no markings or identification. Not on any blueprint I'd seen. There was no guarantee it would lead to safety, but staying here meant certain death from either hypothermia or whatever these entities planned to do when their 3 minutes were up. I forced my freezing legs to move, stumbling toward the unmarked door. The whispers grew more agitated, the cracking of glass more frequent. "Stay!" formed in frost across the floor in my path. "We need you." "For what?" I shouted, still moving. "To replace the failed vessel." A horrifying thought struck me, the same suspicion that had probably led to my uncle's death. What if Kuznetsov, the Kuznetsov running this facility, wasn't related to Subject 6 at all? What if he was Subject 6? What if they had found a way to transfer consciousness? I reached the unmarked door and pulled the handle. Locked. I frantically tried my keycard, and to my surprise, the panel flashed green. The door clicked open. Behind me, the glass of Subject 4's chamber shattered with a sound like a gunshot. Supercooled air rushed out, carrying with it a fine mist that began to coalesce into a vaguely humanoid shape. I didn't wait to see more. I flung myself through the doorway into a narrow, dark tunnel. The passage was claustrophobically tight, forcing me to hunch over as I stumbled forward. The only light came from ancient emergency bulbs placed at irregular intervals, casting just enough dim red glow to see the path ahead. The tunnel gradually sloped upward, a good sign if I wanted to reach the surface. But the cold followed me, seeping through the concrete as if the very walls were freezing. Behind me, I heard something moving, a sound like ice cracking and reforming, punctuated by what might have been footsteps, if footsteps could sound so wrong. Too many impacts in the wrong rhythm. Rule 6 suddenly made terrible sense. These tunnels weren't avoided because they were off the blueprints. They were avoided because they offered the subjects a way out of their containment area during their active hours. I was in their domain now. The tunnel began to branch in multiple directions. With no map to guide me, I was lost within minutes, choosing paths at random, driven by the increasing sounds of pursuit. The cold intensified with each turn, my breath fogging so heavily I could barely see. My extremities had gone from painful to dangerously numb. I reached a junction where 4 tunnels converged and stopped, disoriented. Which way led out? Which way had I come from? In the dim red light, every passage looked identical. Alexei. My name echoed from all directions simultaneously. I froze, unsure which way to run. Your uncle found these tunnels too. The voice was clearer now, less distorted than it had been over the telephone. It sounded almost normal, except for a hollow quality that raised goosebumps on my already frozen skin. "What happened to him?" I called out, trying to pinpoint the source of the voice. "Kuznetsov happened. Subject 6 needed a new vessel. Your uncle was compatible." My breath caught. "Are you saying Kuznetsov is actually—" "The original Kuznetsov has been conscious in that chamber for 40 years, but parts of him have escaped. The brain can project itself under the right conditions." "Who am I talking to?" I demanded, spinning in place, trying to locate the speaker. A figure emerged from one of the tunnels, its outline blurry and unstable, like a heat mirage in reverse. It approximated a human shape, but moved with a stuttering, fragmented motion. "Subject 4, Fyodor Nestorov." The shape flickered. "Former captain, Strategic Rocket Forces, now something else entirely." I backed away, but found another tunnel blocked by a similar shape. "We volunteered for space exploration," the second figure said. "A 6-month mission to test CRYOSLEEP technology." "They never intended to wake us," added a third voice, as another figure emerged. I was surrounded. 3 of the subjects had manifested in the tunnels, blocking all escape routes. "What do you want from me?" my voice cracked with fear. "The same thing Kuznetsov wants," said the first figure, Nestorov. "A vessel. A way out. You want to take over my body?" "No." The answer came from behind me. from a fourth figure that had somehow materialized without my noticing. "We want to warn you." This entity was more defined than the others, its features almost recognizable as human despite their fluid, shifting quality. Subject 7, Grigory Sokolov, it introduced itself. Chief scientist on Project Rusalka, the only one who understood what was happening to us. "You're the project director," I said, remembering my uncle's notes. "The one who supposedly committed suicide." The figure's laugh was like ice breaking. "Is that what the records say? Convenient. I was the first one Kuznetsov took." "But why my uncle? Why me?" "Genetic compatibility and proximity to the source." Sokolov's form rippled. "Kuznetsov can only maintain a physical form through constant proximity to his original body. His consciousness is stretched between 2 points. It's why he never leaves this facility. And why he needs you," added Nestorov. "Fresh genetic material, a new vessel closer to his own genetic makeup." The realization hit me like a physical blow. "Leonid Kuznetsov is related to me. How is that possible?" Sokolov's form drew closer. "Because, Alexei Borodin, Leonid Kuznetsov was your grandfather." The tunnels suddenly seemed to spin around me as the implications sank in. "You need to leave this place," Nestorov urged, "before he takes you too." A distant alarm began to sound, echoing through the tunnels. The figures looked up in unison. "He's coming," Sokolov said. "Go, now." "Which way?" I begged. "Follow the cold," Nestorov instructed, his form already beginning to fade. "Wherever it weakens." I stumbled forward, feeling the air with outstretched hands, sensing the subtle temperature gradients, moving toward whatever seemed even slightly warmer. Behind me, I heard Kuznetsov's voice, the Kuznetsov I'd met in his office, echoing through the tunnels. "Containment breach in observation. Full lockdown initiated." The subjects were gone, retreated to their chambers, or dissolved back into whatever state they existed in when not manifested. I was alone in the tunnels, and the clock was ticking. I followed the thermal gradient through the labyrinthine tunnels, each junction offering a choice between death and possible escape. My fingers had gone from numb to dangerously painful as blood struggled to return. My thoughts were becoming sluggish, early signs of hypothermia. The only thing keeping me moving was raw fear. Fear of Kuznetsov, fear of what waited in the stasis chambers, fear of becoming another vessel. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I noticed the temperature gradually rising. The punishing cold slowly gave way to merely uncomfortable chill. I had to be heading in the right direction, away from the influence of the subjects. The tunnel eventually opened into a small circular chamber with 5 identical doors. In the center stood a rusted metal desk with an ancient computer terminal. The screen glowed with faint green text, illuminating the room with sickly light. It appeared to be some kind of security checkpoint, long abandoned. The computer was running a monitoring program, displaying camera feeds from various parts of Sublevel D, including the observation room I'd fled. The stasis chambers were visible, their broken glass already refreezing in impossible patterns. More concerning was another feed showing Kuznetsov and 2 security guards I didn't recognize moving through the tunnels, methodically checking each branch. They carried what looked like specialized weapons, not standard security gear. I had maybe 10 minutes before they reached this checkpoint. On the desk beside the terminal sat an old leather journal, its pages yellow with age. The handwritten label read, "Dr. Petrov, Psychological Evaluations." I flipped it open, desperate for anything that might help me understand what I was dealing with. The journal contained psychological profiles of the 7 volunteers, with observations spanning from 1983 to 1987, when the entries abruptly stopped. The final entry, dated November 17, 1987, caught my attention. The telepathic capabilities demonstrated by the subjects continue to strengthen, particularly during the resonance window, 0127 to 0403. Subject 6 shows concerning dominance over the others, possibly due to his unique genetic markers. The identical anomaly in his hippocampal structure previously noted in his grandfather's autopsy suggests hereditary predisposition to the neurological changes we're observing. Recommendation: Subject 6 should be terminated before full synaptic bridging occurs. The risk is too great, especially considering the Tunguska incident connection. Tunguska incident, the mysterious explosion in Siberia in 1908 that flattened 830 square miles of forest without leaving a crater. My historical curiosity was interrupted by a flashing red icon on the computer screen. The security feed showed Kuznetsov's team discovering my tracks in the tunnel dust, picking up pace. My window was shrinking rapidly. I tried each door in turn. The first 3 were locked tight. The 4th opened to reveal a small storage closet filled with ancient scientific equipment and notebooks. The 5th door, however, led to another tunnel sloping distinctly upward. Before leaving, I grabbed the journal and quickly searched the storage closet, finding an old maintenance uniform with Petrov stitched on the breast pocket. I pulled it on over my clothes for extra insulation and grabbed a heavy flashlight from a shelf. As I prepared to leave, movement on one of the security monitors caught my eye. Kuznetsov had stopped in the tunnel and was looking directly at the camera as if he knew I was watching. He smiled, a cold, terrible smile, and raised his hand toward the lens. The monitor flickered, and suddenly the image wasn't coming from the tunnel camera at all. It showed a hospital room I recognized immediately. St. Petersburg, 5 years ago. My mother in a hospital bed, withered from cancer. And standing beside her, holding her hand, was Kuznetsov. I had never seen him before today. He hadn't been there when my mother died. This was impossible. Unless... The image changed again. Now it showed my uncle Nikolai in his apartment clutching his chest, face contorted in agony as he collapsed to the floor. Kuznetsov stood in the doorway, watching impassively. These weren't security feeds. They were memories, but not my memories. Kuznetsov's memories. I tore myself away from the screen and bolted through the 5th door, slamming it behind me. This tunnel was better lit than the others, with functional fluorescent lights flickering overhead. The air was noticeably warmer too, almost comfortable. I ran upward, following the incline, hoping it would lead to the main facility or, better yet, the surface. The journal was clutched tightly in my hand, its revelations burning in my mind. My grandfather had been Leonid Kuznetsov. My mother never spoke of her father, claiming he'd died before I was born. But he hadn't died. He'd been frozen in a Soviet experiment, his consciousness warped by decades of immobility, developing powers that shouldn't be possible. And now he was hunting me, his own grandson, to use as a new vessel. The tunnel eventually opened into what appeared to be an old storage room filled with filing cabinets. A faded sign on the wall read, Archive B, Project Volkvi in Cyrillic. Another project name? What was Volkvi? The door leading out of the storage room was locked from the outside, but a quick check of the cabinets revealed they weren't secured to the floor. With desperate strength, I pushed one over, creating a loud crash that would undoubtedly attract attention, but also providing a platform to reach the ceiling tiles. The suspended ceiling gave way easily, allowing me to hoist myself into the crawl space above. I replaced the tile behind me just as I heard voices and footsteps entering the storage room below. "He was here," came Kuznetsov's voice, distorted slightly through the floor. "Recently." "The cabinet, sir," another voice responded. "He must have tried to barricade the door." "No," Kuznetsov said. "He's smarter than that. Check above." I froze, trying to control my breathing as a flashlight beam penetrated the darkness through the seams between ceiling tiles. I slowly, silently crawled away from the beam, moving in what I hoped was the direction of the main facility. The crawl space was a grimy maze of pipes, ductwork, and electrical conduits. I navigated by touch more than sight, painfully aware of every sound I made. Below me, I could hear Kuznetsov's team spreading out, searching methodically. After several minutes of careful movement, I spotted light coming from a vent ahead. Peering through the slats, I saw what looked like an office, a normal office in the main facility, with a window showing the night sky outside. I'd made it back to the upper levels. Carefully removing the vent cover, I lowered myself into the empty office. A desk calendar indicated it belonged to someone named Morozov from accounting. A clock on the wall showed 2:36 a.m., still within the dangerous time window specified in Rule 1. The hallway outside was dimly lit but quiet. The night shift in the main facility was minimal, with most staff working days. I needed to find Pavle, the security guard who'd warned me initially. He seemed to know more than he'd let on. Moving cautiously through the administrative section, I eventually reached the security office. Through the door's window, I could see Pavle at the desk, watching CCTV monitors and sipping from a thermos. I knocked softly. Pavle looked up, startled, then hurried to unlock the door. "Alexei? Where have you been? There's an alert out for you." His eyes widened as he took in my disheveled appearance and the extra uniform I wore. "Is that Petrov's old coat? Where did you—" "Pavle, I need answers," I interrupted, closing the door behind me. "I know about the Rusalka project. I know about my grandfather, Leonid Kuznetsov." The color drained from Pavle's weathered face. "You shouldn't be here. If he finds you—" "He's already looking for me. I need to know everything. What happened to my uncle, what they're really doing down there, and what the Tunguska incident has to do with it." Pavle's hand trembled as he took another sip from his thermos. "Your uncle discovered the same thing you did, that Kuznetsov isn't who he claims to be. The real Kuznetsov is still in that chamber." "Then who is the man calling himself Kuznetsov?" "A projection, a physical manifestation of Subject 6's consciousness. The experiments did something to them, Alexei, changed their brains. And Subject 6, your grandfather, he was always the strongest. But how can he be in two places at once?" Pavle sighed heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 70-plus years. The project wasn't really about space travel. That was the cover story. It was about consciousness transference. The ultimate Soviet weapon, soldiers who could project their consciousness into enemy territory, possess key targets, gather intelligence without ever physically crossing a border. My mind reeled. That's insane. Less insane than you think. The research was based on an artifact recovered from the Tunguska site in 1930. Something not of this world. I pulled out Dr. Petrov's journal. "This mentions Tunguska too. What does a meteor strike from 1908 have to do with this?" "It wasn't a meteor," Pavle said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The Soviet expedition found something in the blast zone, something that affected their minds. Most went mad or died, but one, a scientist named Volkov, he documented the effect before his death. His research became the foundation for Project Rusalka decades later." "And Project Volkvi? I saw that name in the archives." Pavle nodded. "The continuation. After they discovered the subjects were developing abilities beyond what was anticipated, they shifted focus. Volkvi wasn't about espionage anymore. It was about weaponizing what they'd created. My uncle figured this out. Yes, and when he threatened to expose it, the Kuznetsov projection eliminated him, made it look like heart failure. I thought of the memory I'd seen on the monitor. Kuznetsov watching my uncle die. He did the same to my mother, didn't he? Targeted his own daughter. Pavle looked away. The projection requires genetic proximity to remain stable. The closer the DNA matched to the original body, the stronger the manifestation. Your uncle provided temporary stability, but you, a direct descendant, you would offer something much more permanent. The implications turned my stomach. How do I stop him? You can't stop him, Alexei, not alone. The only hope is to destabilize the original consciousness, Subject 6, in his chamber. Kill my grandfather? The real one? Pavle's eyes met mine, deadly serious. It's him or you, and if he takes you, his power will grow exponentially. The damage he could do. He shuddered visibly. The security office door suddenly swung open. In the doorway stood Kuznetsov, flanked by the same guards I'd seen in the tunnels. Discussing family history, are we? Kuznetsov's smile was coldly amused. How touching. Pavle reached for his sidearm, but one of the guards shot him before he could draw it. A strange weapon that made no sound but left Pavle crumpling to the floor, blood seeping from his nose and ears. Now then, Alexei, Kuznetsov said, stepping over Pavle's body. "I think it's time you and I had a proper family reunion. Your grandfather has waited 40 years to meet you." I backed away, clutching Petrov's journal like a shield. "You're not real, you're just a projection." His smile widened. "I'm real enough to kill your uncle, real enough to ensure your mother never told you about your heritage." He extended his hand. "And real enough to bring you home." One of the guards moved behind me, blocking any escape. I was trapped. "What happens if I refuse?" Kuznetsov's eyes hardened. "Then we do this the hard way. Either way, you're coming to Sublevel D." "Why me?" "Why now, after all these years?" "Because you're perfect, Alexei. The last of the bloodline, with the same rare neurological markers. The final piece we've been cultivating since before you were born." A cold realization washed over me. You engineered my entire life, my career, my disgrace, bringing me here. It was all planned. "Of course it was." Kuznetsov glanced at his watch. "We have just over an hour before the window closes. Shall we?" With Pavle dead and guards blocking any escape, I had no choice but to be marched back toward the service elevator, toward Sublevel D, toward the frozen man who was simultaneously my grandfather and my would-be possessor. But I still had Petrov's journal clutched in my hand. And if there was one thing I'd learned about rules in this facility, it was that understanding them might be the only thing keeping me alive. The elevator descent to Sublevel D felt like a journey to my own execution. Kuznetsov stood beside me, unnaturally still, while the guards kept their strange weapons trained on me. I clutched Petrov's journal, my mind racing to process everything I'd learned and desperately searching for something, anything that might help me survive. "You won't find salvation in those pages," Kuznetsov said as if reading my thoughts. Petrov understood so little of what was really happening. "And you understand it all." I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. His lips curled in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've had 40 years to understand it. 40 years of consciousness stretched between two states of being. Do you know what that teaches you, Alexei? Enlighten me. Patience." The elevator doors opened to Sublevel D, and the true nature of time. We stepped out into the corridor, which was significantly colder than when I'd fled. Frost coated the walls in intricate patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from the corner of my eye. The air felt heavy, charged with something beyond the physical, a pressure against my mind rather than my body. "The window is still open," Kuznetsov observed. "Good. They're waiting for us." He led me not to the observation room where I'd seen the chambers, but to a new area, a heavy blast door at the end of corridor D12. Rule 7 suddenly echoed in my mind. If you hear your name called from behind the sealed door at the end of corridor D12, ignore it completely. "What's in there?" I asked, trying to mask my growing terror. "The truth," Kuznetsov replied simply. He placed his palm on a scanner and the massive door slowly swung open. Beyond lay a cavernous chamber carved directly into the bedrock. The walls were lined with equipment that looked far more advanced than anything else I'd seen in the facility. Sleek, modern technology interspersed with older Soviet-era machines. But what dominated the space was a perfect circle of 7 crystalline pods arranged around a central platform. Each pod was connected to the platform by cables and tubes that pulsed with an eerie blue luminescence. Inside, 6 of the pods were the Stasis Chambers I'd seen earlier, containing the frozen bodies of the volunteers. The 7th pod, however, was empty. "Waiting for you," Kuznetsov said, following my gaze to the empty pod. "Your inheritance." The guards forced me forward onto the central platform. Close up, I could see each occupied pod clearly. The men inside were exactly as I'd glimpsed earlier, ancient, preserved, eyes alert and aware. Their gazes followed me with predatory focus. "What exactly are you planning to do with me?" I asked, my voice remarkably steady considering the circumstances. "Not what you think," Kuznetsov replied. "We're not going to replace you, Alexei. You're going to join us. Become the 7th node in our collective." "Collective?" He gestured around the chamber. This facility was built at a nexus point, a place where the barrier between dimensions is naturally thin. The Tunguska object thinned it further, and our experiments tore it completely. What we discovered was communion. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the freezing temperature. Communion with what? The entity on the other side. The one that's been feeding us, sustaining us, teaching us for 40 years. Kuznetsov's eyes gleamed with fanatical intensity. The Soviets thought they were creating psychic spies, but they accidentally created a doorway instead. I looked again at the Stasis Chambers, at the men trapped inside. Were they victims or willing participants in whatever madness this was? You still don't understand, Kuznetsov continued. Let me show you. He nodded to one of the guards, who activated a control panel on the platform. The blue luminescence in the tubes brightened, and the temperature plummeted further. Look at the original, Kuznetsov instructed, pointing to Pod 6, the chamber containing the real Leonid Kuznetsov, my grandfather. I reluctantly focused on the withered figure. As I watched, the man's eyes widened and his lips moved slightly, forming words I couldn't hear through the thick glass. Listen with your mind, not your ears, Kuznetsov urged. Against my better judgment, I concentrated, trying to understand what my grandfather was trying to communicate. The whisper started faintly, then grew stronger. Not real. Trap. What isn't real? I asked aloud. My grandfather's eyes bulged with effort. Him, not me. I turned to the Kuznetsov standing beside me, who was watching the exchange with an expression of amusement. What does he mean, not me? The standing Kuznetsov sighed. He's been saying that for decades. Denial. He can't accept what he's become part of. But something about my grandfather's desperate attempt to communicate struck me as genuine. I looked back at the chamber, and in the glass I saw multiple reflections. Myself, the guards, and Kuznetsov. Except Kuznetsov had no reflection. The realization must have shown on my face because the thing that wasn't Kuznetsov moved with inhuman speed, gripping my arm with painful force. Clever boy, finally seeing clearly. His voice had changed, the human quality replaced by something hollow and wrong. But too late. I tried to pull away, but his strength was impossible. One of the guards approached with what looked like a medical device. We don't need your consent, Alexei, the false Kuznetsov said. Only your body, your bloodline, the link back to what came through at Tunguska. What are you? I demanded. His form rippled slightly, features momentarily losing definition. I am the collector, the caretaker, the guardian of the gateway. A terrible smile spread across his face, and soon I will be you as well. In a moment of desperate clarity, I remembered Rule 3, the red telephone, the 7-second call. What had the voice said? Your uncle understood. We showed him the truth. Not just my uncle, my grandfather as well. The real Leonid Kuznetsov trapped in the chamber was trying to warn me. The entity wearing Kuznetsov's appearance nodded to the guard, who raised the medical device to my neck. I felt a sharp sting and immediately the room began to swim around me. The process will be easier if you don't fight it, the false Kuznetsov said, his voice growing distant. Your consciousness will join the collective and your body will house a fragment of our essence. As my vision blurred, I saw the 7 chambers more clearly than ever, not with my eyes, but with something else. The men inside weren't willing participants. They were batteries, their life force being slowly drained to maintain the tear between dimensions. And the entity wasn't just using Kuznetsov's form. It had fragments in all of them, feeding on their consciousness, using their psychic abilities to project itself into our world. Why my family? I managed to ask, my tongue feeling thick and unresponsive. The one you call Leonid Kuznetsov is special. His bloodline traces back to the first contact, when the object fell from the sky. His ancestors were there. They touched the fragment. They were altered. My knees buckled, and the guards caught me, dragging me toward the empty pod. Through my drugged haze, I recalled the last rule, Rule 7, about ignoring voices calling my name from behind this very door. It wasn't to protect me from the subjects, it was to protect me from this entity. As they strapped me into the pod, I felt a presence in my mind, not the invasive pressure of the entity, but something else. Multiple presences, reaching out in desperation. The subjects, my grandfather, the other men. They were trying to help me. "The rules," whispered a voice in my head. "Break them all." Break the rules? The rules were supposed to keep people safe. No, I realized suddenly. The rules were designed to keep the entity contained, to limit its influence. Breaking them might unleash chaos, but it might also disrupt whatever ritual was underway. With my last bit of clarity, I focused on Rule 2, always whistle in room D7. Whistling disrupted telepathic connection. I began to whistle weakly, the sound barely audible through my numbed lips. The effect was immediate. The false Kuznetsov's form flickered violently, and he let out an inhuman shriek. "Stop that!" One of the guards struck me across the face, cutting off my whistling. But I'd seen its effect. I knew I was right. Rule 4. If temperature drops below -40 degrees Celsius, leave immediately. The extreme cold was part of their power. With my bound hands, I reached for the journal I'd somehow managed to keep hold of and hurled it at the nearest control panel. It hit a series of switches, and alarms immediately began to blare. "Temperature regulation failure," announced an automated voice. "Emergency heating protocols engaged." Jets of heated air began pouring into the chamber from vents in the ceiling. "No!" The false Kuznetsov's form was becoming increasingly unstable, rippling and distorting like a bad television signal. "Stop him!" But it was too late. The damage was done. As the temperature in the chamber rapidly rose, the entity's manifestation became weaker. The tubes connecting the pods flickered erratically. Rule 3. Answer the red telephone before the 4th ring, say only the prescribed response. In the corner of the chamber, almost unnoticed until now, sat another red telephone. It began to ring. No one moved to answer it. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. On the 4th ring, the world exploded into chaos. The glass of all 6 occupied pods shattered simultaneously. Alarms wailed throughout the facility. The tubes connecting the pods to the central platform burst, spraying supercooled liquid across the room. And through it all, the false Kuznetsov screamed, a sound no human throat could produce, a sound that existed as much in my mind as in my ears. I felt the straps holding me loosen as the pod malfunctioned. With strength born of pure terror, I pushed myself free and collapsed to the floor. The entity that had worn Kuznetsov's form was dissolving, its human appearance giving way to something I wouldn't comprehend. A shape of angles and dimensions that hurt to look at. "You've doomed them all," it hissed in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "They cannot survive disconnection." The 6 subjects, free from their chambers for the first time in decades, lay on the floor in pools of freezing liquid, their ancient bodies spasming and contorting. I crawled toward my grandfather, drawn by some instinct I couldn't name. His withered hand reached out, gripping mine with surprising strength. And then, for the first time in 40 years, Leonid Kuznetsov spoke with his own voice. "Run," he rasped. "Before it closes." The ground beneath us began to tremble. The nexus point, whatever dimensional tear they'd been maintaining, was becoming unstable. I wanted to help them, to save these men, but the chamber was collapsing around us. Chunks of rock fell from the ceiling as the tremors intensified. With one last look at my grandfather, I staggered to my feet and ran for the exit, leaving behind the entity, the guards, and the 6 men who had been prisoners for longer than I'd been alive. Behind me, the massive blast door began to close automatically. I dove through the narrowing gap, tumbling into the corridor as the door sealed with a final, decisive thud. The tremors continued, growing stronger by the second. Whatever was happening in that chamber, it wasn't over. And neither was my nightmare. The tremors intensified as I staggered down the corridor, klaxons blaring and emergency lights bathing everything in pulsing red. The temperature was rising rapidly as the facility's heating systems worked to counteract the extreme cold that had been emanating from the chamber. Steam hissed from pipes that had been frozen moments before. I had no plan beyond escape, get to the elevator, reach the surface, and put as much distance between myself and this nightmare as possible. But Sublevel D had become a maze of collapsing corridors and sealed blast doors. The primary elevator was locked down, its panel dark and unresponsive. The tremors weren't just affecting the sealed chamber, they were destabilizing the entire underground complex. "Attention all personnel," an automated voice announced over the PA system. "Critical containment failure in Research Zone D12. Emergency protocol firebreak has been initiated. All personnel must evacuate immediately. Facility self-destruct sequence will commence in 15 minutes. Self-destruct? Was that even real? It sounded like something from a science fiction movie, not a research facility. But given what I'd witnessed so far, I wasn't taking any chances. I needed to find another way out. The maintenance tunnels I'd escaped through earlier were my best option, but finding the entrance again in this chaos would be nearly impossible. A violent tremor threw me against the wall. Dust and concrete fragments rained from the ceiling. The facility was literally coming apart around me. As I pushed myself upright, I noticed something odd about the section of wall I'd hit. It wasn't concrete like the rest of the corridor, but metal, cleverly painted to match its surroundings. And there was a hairline seam around its edges. A hidden door. I ran my hands along the edge, searching for a latch or control panel, but found nothing. Another tremor rocked the corridor, stronger than the last, and the false wall shifted slightly. Taking a chance, I braced myself and rammed my shoulder against it. Pain exploded through my arm, but the panel gave way slightly. I tried again, throwing my full weight against it, and this time it swung inward with a groan of protesting metal. Beyond lay a narrow utility shaft with a ladder leading up. Emergency lighting illuminated the space with dim blue light, revealing the Cyrillic stenciling on the wall. Emergency evacuation, Route B. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the ladder and began to climb, ignoring the burning in my muscles and the throbbing pain in my shoulder. Above me, the shaft seemed to extend upward for hundreds of feet. Another announcement echoed through the facility. 13 minutes until facility self-destruct. All personnel must evacuate immediately. I climbed faster, adrenaline overriding exhaustion. The ladder swayed with each tremor, and several times I nearly lost my grip. My progress was painfully slow given the urgency of the situation. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, I reached a horizontal tunnel branching off from the shaft. A sign indicated it led to Surface Access Point 4. Taking a chance, I left the ladder and followed the tunnel. The passage eventually opened into what appeared to be an equipment garage. Snowmobiles and heavy-duty trucks sat in ordered rows, keys dangling from a board on the wall. Beyond them, a large door likely led to the surface. Another tremor, the strongest yet, shook the garage. A ceiling beam crashed down, narrowly missing me and crushing the hood of one of the trucks. Through the resulting hole in the ceiling, I could see stars. Actual stars. I was close to the surface. I grabbed keys for one of the snowmobiles, praying it would start after sitting unused for who knew how long. But before I could reach the vehicles, a familiar voice called my name. Alexei. I spun around. Standing in the tunnel entrance was Kuznetsov, or rather, the entity that had taken his form. Its appearance was unstable, features shifting and blurring like a glitch in reality. But it was still recognizable, still terrifying. "You can't escape what's coming," it said, its voice distorting between human speech and something else entirely. A sound like breaking glass mixed with static. "The gateway is destabilizing. When it collapses, the energy release will exceed Tunguska 100-fold. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, backing toward the vehicles. "To survive." Its form flickered violently. "I've invested too much in your bloodline to lose you now." "My bloodline? What does that even mean?" The entity's laughter was a terrible sound, like ice cracking on a frozen lake. "Your family has been ours since 1908. Your great-grandfather wasn't just at Tunguska, he was Tunguska, the first vessel, the first gateway." Images flashed through my mind, memories that weren't mine. A forest in Siberia, a light in the sky. A man reaching out to touch something that shouldn't exist in our reality. "The Soviet scientists didn't choose Leonid by accident," the entity continued, taking a step toward me. "They knew about his genetic anomaly, the changes passed down from his grandfather. They thought they could weaponize it. They had no idea what they were really dealing with. Another tremor shook the garage, stronger than before. More debris fell from the ceiling. A warning light began flashing over the exterior door as it slowly started to open automatically, part of the evacuation protocol. 9 minutes until facility self-destruct, the automated voice announced. The entity glanced upward. We're out of time. Come with me now, or die with the rest of them. I'd rather die, I spat. Its expression hardened. That can be arranged, but your body will still serve our purpose. It lunged with impossible speed. I dove aside, scrambling toward the snowmobiles. The entity crashed into a support column, its form briefly destabilizing further upon impact. I reached the nearest snowmobile and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. The exterior door was now half open, revealing the snow-covered landscape beyond and the first hint of dawn on the horizon. The entity recovered and moved toward me again, but another violent tremor sent a cascade of debris between us. I gunned the snowmobile's engine, aiming for the partially open door. "You can't outrun what's coming," the entity shrieked behind me. "The collapse will consume everything for miles." I burst through the door into the frigid Arctic morning, the snowmobile's treads finding purchase on the fresh snow. Behind me, the Kohler facility's main buildings were already showing signs of the devastation below. Cracks spreading across concrete walls, equipment toppling, personnel running for evacuation vehicles. I didn't slow down. I aimed the snowmobile away from the facility and opened the throttle completely, racing across the barren landscape. The cold air bit at my exposed skin, but I barely noticed. All that mattered was distance. A massive tremor ripped through the ground, nearly unseating me. I looked back to see a section of the facility collapse in on itself, dust and smoke billowing upward. The self-destruct sequence was underway, or perhaps the dimensional gateway was collapsing on its own. Either way, the result would be the same. I pushed the snowmobile harder, fighting to maintain control on the uneven terrain. According to the facility maps I'd seen, there was a small research outpost about 10 kilometers north that might have a radio, a way to call for help. But would 10 kilometers be enough? The entity had said the energy release would exceed Tunguska, an explosion that had flattened trees for 30 kilometers in every direction. The tremors were growing more frequent, the ground beneath the snowmobile's treads buckling and splitting. In the distance, I could see other evacuation vehicles fleeing in different directions, facility staff making the same desperate escape attempt. A deafening roar filled the air, rising to a pitch that hurt my ears. I risked another glance back. What I saw defied description. The facility wasn't just collapsing, it was imploding, the buildings and surrounding landscape being pulled inward toward a central point as if by an impossibly powerful vacuum. And above it, the air itself seemed to be tearing, revealing glimpses of something else. Something that didn't belong in our reality. The gateway was collapsing just as the entity had warned, and I wasn't going to outrun it. As if confirming my thoughts, the snowmobile's engine suddenly died. All around me, snow and debris began moving back toward the facility, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. The implosion was creating a vortex, pulling everything inward. I abandoned the useless vehicle and continued on foot, fighting against the growing pull. Each step became harder than the last as the vortex strengthened. Trees uprooted around me, flying back toward the center point. In a moment of strange clarity, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Exhaustion and acceptance had replaced terror. I'd done everything I could. I'd discovered the truth about my family, about what lurked beneath the Kohler facility. I'd even temporarily disrupted whatever the entity had planned. But this was the end. No one was outrunning this. As the pull became irresistible, lifting me off my feet, a strange peace came over me. I closed my eyes, thinking of my mother, my uncle Nikolai, and finally my grandfather, the real Leonid Kuznetsov. They had all been victims of something begun decades before any of us were born. A cosmic horror set in motion by a single object falling from the sky in 1908. The roar became all-encompassing, so loud it ceased to be sound and became pure sensation. My body hurtled backward toward the collapsing gateway. In my final moments of consciousness, I thought I heard my grandfather's voice, Not the withered man in the chamber, but strong and clear as he must have been before. This is not the end, Alexei. It's a beginning. Then everything, light, sound, matter, time itself, compressed to a single point of unimaginable density and exploded outward. The shockwave rippled across dimensions, tearing reality like tissue paper. In that moment, the walls between worlds were thinner than they had ever been. Through that tear, something escaped. Something that had been waiting for this moment for 40 years, 115 years really since Tunguska. It wore my face as it emerged into the new dawn, walking calmly away from the smouldering crater that had once been the Kola super-deep borehole facility. My memories, my body, but something else entirely behind my eyes. As rescue helicopters approached the disaster site hours later, it smiled my smile at the first responders, told my story of miraculous survival, and began its work. The last of the Kuznetsov bloodline hadn't escaped after all. It had simply evolved. The Kola incident was quickly contained, both physically and informationally. Official reports described it as a catastrophic structural failure of the aging Soviet-era facility, exacerbated by improper maintenance and unusually severe seismic activity in a region not known for earthquakes. 32 people were confirmed dead. 47 survived, including a maintenance worker named Alexei Borodin, who was found wandering the perimeter with minor injuries and an incredible story of escape. That story never made it into any official records. The crater left behind became an object of scientific interest, drawing research teams from across Russia. They found radiation levels within normal parameters, no chemical contamination, nothing to suggest anything beyond a tragic industrial accident. The Russian military cordoned off the site nonetheless, citing national security concerns related to the facility's original purpose. 6 months after the incident, Dr. Mikhail Sokolov, lead physicist at Moscow State University, received a visitor in his office. The man introduced himself as Alexei Borodin, one of the Kola survivors, seeking expert consultation on a theoretical physics paper he was writing about dimensional barriers. Sokolov was impressed by the young man's insights, remarkably advanced for someone with only a maintenance background. When asked about his sudden interest in theoretical physics, Borodin simply smiled and said he'd had a life-changing experience at Kola. If Sokolov had checked more carefully, he might have noticed that Grigory Sokolov, Subject 7, the chief scientist from Project Rusalka, had been his distant relative. He might have wondered why Borodin's eyes seemed to change color in certain lights, or why room temperature dropped noticeably during their conversation. He might have questioned why 3 other Kola survivors had secured positions at key research institutions across Russia, all working on projects related to quantum physics and dimensional theory. But he didn't. In his apartment that night, the entity wearing Alexei Borodin's form studied the collection of research papers spread across the desk, theoretical models of dimensional gates, calculations of energy requirements, historical records of unexplained phenomena. Tunguska, yes, but others too. Patterns spanning centuries. On the wall hung a map marked with locations of suspected thin points between dimensions. The Kola site was circled in red, with a line struck through it. Other locations were highlighted: Dyatlov Pass, Lake Baikal, a remote section of the Siberian taiga. The being that was not Alexei opened a notebook, adding new calculations based on Sokolov's insights. The theory was sound. The next attempt would be more controlled, less destructive, more sustainable. The entity had learned patience during its 40 years beneath the Kola facility. It could wait a little longer. In the drawer of the desk lay a folder containing newspaper clippings. Most were obituaries: Pavle the security guard, Anton the technician, others who had worked at the facility and somehow survived the collapse, only to die in the months that followed. Seemingly random accidents, suicides, sudden unexplained illnesses. Loose ends, neatly tied. The final clipping was different, a small article about a memorial service for the Kola victims, with a photograph of the surviving staff. In it, 4 individuals stood slightly apart from the others, their eyes reflecting the camera flash in an unusual way. Their faces were different, but the eyes held the same alien intelligence. The gateway had collapsed, but something had escaped. not just through Alexei's body but through others as well. Fragments of the entity, seeking to reassemble, to rebuild, to open the way again, properly this time. The being wearing Alexei's face closed the notebook and looked toward the night sky, feeling the distant pull of its true home across the void between dimensions. Soon, it thought, the experiments of 1983 were merely a beginning. The true work was just getting started.